My Assessment in Special Education Final Product by Keisha Williams. Least restrictive environment. What is it? It looks different for each kid, but it's typically where the student learns best and they're with their peers as much as possible. This is the most typical kind of learning. It can look a few different ways, though. It can look like the student is in the general education classroom with support, and that means related services such as speech, a para, OT, PT, things like that. So they're in the general education classroom learning alongside their peers, but they have some support in the classroom. It can also look like a partial inclusion classroom, which means that they're in the classroom for the most part, the general education classroom, but they do get some pull-outs. That can look like getting pulled out for a small group, like for reading, they could get pulled out to go to the resource room or the special education classroom and get that small group instruction, one-on-one type of pull out for testing, things like that. It can also look like special education services where they're with kids of similar learning needs. So the kids may get pulled out for reading that are on the same level of reading, and then they'll work together as a small group there, but they're working inside the special education classroom the majority of the time, except for usually like specials like music, PE, classes like that, where they're able to be with their peers and perform to the best of their ability. Then they'll be with their peers, because that is, after all, the main goal of inclusion is having our children be present in the least restrictive environment. And then this can also look like a specialized program outside the school. So for example, a hospice program or a school that is away from your area where you live, typically, and it's where the student will live a lot of times, and they will specialize the program for the student there where they are. The components of the special education process is described as a cycle because it's ongoing, it's continuous, even after the student is eligible and starts receiving services, it keeps on going and going and going. So there's always testing, there's always reevaluations, there's always data collections. It's a very systematic approach, and it's just it's a cycle. It keeps going and going and going. The steps of the educational process are identification and referral, determination of eligibility, program planning, and program implementation and evaluation. So the identification and referral step has the largest number of students. This is where the teachers may see a student and see the data that they've recorded and realize that they may need some additional services. So just because the student has been referred does not automatically mean that they have an identification and that they're going to receive special education services. It just means that we need to look further into this. Are there some intervention type things that we can do to help this student? Are there extra steps that we can do to help them without putting them on an IEP? So once they've been referred, you have to do a determination of eligibility. So this is a systematic approach, and it's made up of teams. There's a team that includes the special education teacher, the general education teacher, the parents, other additional services such as speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychologists if necessary. Just everyone that's going to be working with that student is going to be on this team. Parental permission is required, and I put that on here because it's one of the most important things. You cannot do testing without parent permission. You cannot start an IEP without parent permission. You can't follow an IEP without parent permission. Basically, they're in charge of everything. They decide yes or no, I want my child to receive these services, or yes, I want them to receive these services, or no, I don't want them to receive these services. So once the determination of eligibility has been established, then you go into the program planning step. That is where the IEP is written. So you look at the needs of the student and you determine how much time they're going to need in the classroom, out of the classroom. Are they going to need math help? Are they going to need reading help? Are we looking at physical therapy needs, occupational therapy needs? Are we going to have to help them write? Are we going to have to pull them out for tests? Things like that are all going to be in that IEP. You're going to plan that IEP during this step. And then after that is the program implementation and evaluation. That just means that you're working the system, you're working the IEP, you're following it, you're doing everything that's written on there. If it says 20 minutes a week or 20 minutes a day of reading pull out, you're doing that. And you're monitoring that progress. So you are taking data and you're doing worksheets and you're doing lessons and you are seeing if your student is increasing or decreasing or where they're at on the scale. Just continuous monitoring, because you are going to do periodic reevaluations. So every year you're going to revisit the IEP and make sure that it's still up to date and it's still appropriate. Do you need to change any of your goals? Do you need to alter any of your goals? Is this working? Is this not working? Things like that. And then every 3 years you're going to do your reevaluation, where you do all of your testing over again, see what level your students are at, and where they still need to go, or if they don't qualify for special education anymore. That's another step that parents are going to be involved in. You're going to include them on your data findings and what's happening, and just keep them up to date on what's happening. Family participation is extremely important because you want everyone to feel included in their child's education. If you think about it, the children spend more time at school with the teachers a lot of times than they do at home. So it's very important that you include the family in your students' learning. And 5 different ways that you could do this are creating trust, having clear communication, showing equality, being respectful, and being committed. So for trust, you want to establish that you're reliable. You want your families to know that their children are safe with you, that you are dependable, and you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So follow through with what you say. Be reliable. Make sure that they know they can trust you. Communication, you need to be clear and concise. Frequent communication, a lot of times you can do like texting or email, but call your parents and tell them all the good things that your students are doing. It doesn't always have to be a call home to express a negative thing. And along with negativity, avoid blame. If something happens, own up to it. Take control of it. Don't try to blame someone, because you need to be setting an example that you are in control, you are dependable, you are trustworthy, and the communication is clear. And if something isn't clear, find out what the confusion is and let your parents know that you guys are working together. For equality, show your parents and your families that they are validated. Be an advocate for your student. Make sure that they know that they can trust you and that they can be treated with respect in your classroom. If you don't know about your students' cultures or ways of living, find out. Find out information about their lives and things that might help your your students your trust with your students in your classroom. Be respectful. That includes being courteous, kind, non-biased, non-discriminatory. Just treat your students as human beings. Remember that they are young and they are learning and they might make mistakes, and you need to be there to help teach them the correct ways to do things, um, and not base any of how you any feelings towards them because of their race or ethnicity or gender or any of that stuff. Just be respectful. And last but not least is be committed. Be committed to your class. That might mean that your schedule needs to be a little flexible. You can still be reliable and dependable while being flexible. If your student has a huge assignment that's due and they did not get any sleep last night because of home life, work around that. Show understanding and care for your students. Treat them as individuals. They are people, they are learning, they are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But you just need to make sure that your family and your students' biggest one is trust. They need to trust you. There are 3 different types of derived scores, and those are percentile ranks, Stanines, and standard scores. So the percentile rank is the percentage of the people. So if you have 75%, they're in the norm or below. This is different for age and grade levels, so they're going to differ depending on what age you're working with. The standard scores are where the raw scores change to a new scale. There is a set mean, standard deviation, and your deviations are going to fall below or above. So average, low, below, or average, high, above. This is comparing the performance of the same person but using different scales. So you have your Z-score, T-score, standard score, things like that. So where the percentile rank is comparing age groups or grade levels and all the people in that age group or grade level. The standard score is comparing the same person but at different levels. The Stanines is the standard 9s, so there's 9 groups, and they're within 0.5 standard deviation in width. These represent the range of performance. So it represents what range your students are working in. It is less precise because it's a range and it's not the same scale for age groups or grade levels. And there's a chart there included that talks about all of the relationships between the types of scores.